Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York, and this is part two of a great conversation with Ira Berko and his new book, Baseball's Best Ever, half century covering Hall of Famers at Cooperstown. Good to see you. And we were talking about so many of the stars, not enough because we got so many more to cover. And I mentioned that we'd get back to Red Smith, and let's briefly do that if you can. You spent a lifetime knowing the man and kind of working with him at times, but he was so instrumental in what you became.
Well, Red Smith was one of the great writers in America, sports writers or otherwise. And when I started writing for my college newspaper, Miami of Ohio, and I liked it, and I wanted to be good, and I had read Red Smith in Chicago at the Chicago Sun-Times where he was syndicated. And so I decided to send him two of my columns at the New York Herald Tribune, which was his flagship newspaper. I didn't have his home address, of course. And so about a month later, I get a letter from Walter W. Red Smith.
Wow.
New York. Actually, it was his home address in Connecticut. He lived in Stamford, Connecticut. And it said, Dear Ira Berko, when I was a cub reporter in Milwaukee and writing a lead, the sports editor would come by, look over my shoulder. No, I'm sorry, the editor would come by and look over my shoulder. And if he liked what he saw, he'd nod and walk away. If he didn't, he'd say to me, try again. My advice to you is try again.
Wow.
And again, if you're for this business, and not many really are, you'll have an eternity of sweat and tears ahead. But never mind about this. Continue. If this is for you, continue on. And he said, I was going to write in marginal criticisms, but they wouldn't have made you happy. So I got those two columns, copies of those two columns. I pasted them up, put them in an envelope, sent them to Red Smith with a note. Dear Mr. Smith, please make me unhappy.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
and we started a communication, and then later when I came to New York, we became friends. And eventually,
Colleagues.
the New York Times hired me at a time when Red was ill. He was fading, and it turned out that on days that Red wasn't writing the column, they asked me to write the column.
Well, of course, you later wrote his biography called Red,
Yeah.
which is a great book, by the way. If you haven't found it, go find it. Ira's bio of Red Smith.
But the thing before this, that when Red died on January 15, 1982, so I'd been at the paper for almost a year, and when he died, I got a call from Joe Vecchio, the sports editor of the New York Times. And he said, Ira, I've got bad news. Red Smith just died. And he had become my mentor and my friend, and it was moving for me. And he said, we have an advance obituary in the house, but we don't like it. We'd like you to write the obituary on Red Smith.
Which you did.
And it turned out that usually an obit is like no more than, say, 1,500 words or so. And this was almost 3,000. I mean, it was a long obituary, and but it turned out to be well received. But the next morning, I get the newspaper delivered at my doorstep, the New York Times, and so I open up the paper looking for the obituary that I had written. I went to the sports page, and there was no obituary, and then I went to the obituary page, and there was no obituary, and I said, well, I guess I don't know. They have to pay attention to Red Smith's death. So I folded paper back up, and there, just below the fold on an A1 front page of the newspaper.
Front page.
Front page of the newspaper is the obituary I wrote on Red Smith.
I teased the folks last week with that you were going to be talking about Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe, which was quite a couple there for a very short time, and a sore point with Joe in later years. And column that you wrote when Joe was ill and in a Florida hospital.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Joe was in his 80s, I think close to 84, and it was touch and go and how he was going to. And I had known Joe through the years. He was friendly with Hank Greenberg, and I wrote helped Hank Greenberg write his autobiography, and I think that endeared me to Joe DiMaggio because he liked Hank Greenberg, and so somehow or other he seemed to trust me. And there was at an old timers day before the old timers went out on the field, and DiMaggio would be one of them. We were in the press room at Yankee Stadium having lunch, and I told Joe that when I was 10 years old, I sent away to the Yankees to get a glossy picture of him. They sent back, and I nailed the picture to the wall, but I said I nailed it to your forehead, and I'm sorry to put up. And now I'm telling him this at lunch, 60 years later or 50 years later. And I said, I'm sorry that I put the nail in your forehead. And now he made a joke. He doesn't usually joke. And he said, yeah, I heal fast.
I heal fast?
I heal fast, But anyway, a judge in Baltimore had sent me a couple of photographs of DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe on their honeymoon getting off a plane in Tokyo. And the brass generals in the U.S. Army met DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe, and they asked Marilyn if she would go to Korea to entertain the troops for a day.
Yeah.
This is on their honeymoon.
Right.
And so Marilyn says to Joe, how do you feel about that? And Joe said, well, it's for the troops. Go ahead. Okay. And so she goes ahead. And now Joe is back in Tokyo, and she's in Korea. Now she comes back, and she comes through the hotel room door, and Joe greets her, and she says, Joe said, how did it go? And she said, Joe, you've never heard such cheering. And he said, supposedly, yes, I have. This is the story about that.
That was a Gay Talese.
And there was a Gay Talese story in Esquire about DiMaggio, and that's where it came from. And so I was walking with DiMaggio, and I said, is it true? That conversation, and he said yes. But before this, with the pictures, the judges sent me the pictures, and so I gave those pictures to Joe, and Joe looked at them. And I said to Joe, and you had to be very timid because if you're mentioning Marilyn Monroe to Joe DiMaggio, and so I said, boy, she looked great in the photos. And Joe said to me, as if he was stunned, and he said, she was a beautiful woman. like this is the front page news.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about Hank Aaron, up from obscurity. And a great first line, again, from the pen of Ira Berko. The opening of this column, first of all, Hank Aaron's swing is all wrong.
Yeah. Well, he started playing baseball, and usually a right-handed batter will have his right hand above the left hand holding the bat. But he reversed it, and it was only in by the time, I think, high minor leagues, I guess, or the Negro leagues, that he changed it so to swing properly. Also, usually a right-handed batter plants his right foot, and then you stride off the right,
the back foot, sure.
The back foot. but he strode off the left foot. And so he was all wrong. He did it all wrong, you know,
Yeah.
which,
Yeah, it seemed to work for him. Right? I think he was
it
pretty.
wa-
I think he was a fairly good hitter.
yeah, 755 home runs.
Well, you also talk in that column about the slights and the outrages that he suffered as a black man.
Yeah.
You know, trying to make his way in a white man's sport.
Well, and even beyond that, one thing that's not in the column, maybe in another column, but I met him for lunch in New York at a restaurant, and he came in and he was angry. And I said, what's wrong? He said, I was just in a department store, and I was at the men's department, and I was just walking around, and a white salesman comes over and says, can I help you? And I said, no, I'm just looking. And as I started walking, he starts following me, as if to be watching me to see if I was going to steal anything. And he said, that guy wouldn't do it to a white guy. He said, but he would do it to a black guy.
It's interesting because you have a column about Bob Gibson with a similar incident that Bob relates to, because I think you wrote the column entitled "Only His Pride Hasn't Changed," and it was in his final year, and you know, he was feeling his age.
Yeah.
He talked about his knees being drained 22 times that year, and he
Yeah.
was still. But he also reflected on something like what happened to Hank.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in 1968, he broke the World Series record of 17 strikeouts, and I was there against the Tigers, and the Tigers looked like little leaguers against him in that game.
This is 68?
68.
Yeah, well, that was the year he had that.
With a 112 earned run average.
Yeah, incredible.
He was fabulous, but he was on an elevator in a hotel, and he was wearing a suit and tie, and a couple gets on, and the man says to Gibson, 22nd floor, please.
I think you wrote it. I want the 22nd floor.
Oh,
The guy says to him.
Right. He says, I want the 22nd floor. In other words, you are the elevator operator. You're going to take me up to the 22nd. I want the 22nd floor. And Gibson said, look, as far as I'm concerned, you could have the whole hotel. Forget about the 22nd floor.
I just love it. Oh, yeah, that just far too much of that. Gosh, we have so many people I hear that I have on here. Yogi, I love the column. Yogi Berra, baseball's oddest marvel. Everything seemed to come up roses for this guy.
Yeah, he did. But a moment that I will always remember about Yogi, you know, he was angry at George Steinbrenner, and so he wouldn't have anything to do with the Yankees anymore.
Yeah.
That changed after some years. But anyway, a neighbor of Yogi's owned the Houston Astros, and so we hired him as a coach. And so now I was with Yogi in spring training, and the Houston uniform was a white shirt and black pants. And so as we're walking along the sideline, a woman calls out and says, Yogi, could you sign my autograph book? So Yogi walks over and takes the pen and signs the autograph book, but then he looks at the pen and he said, lady, your pen is leaking. And he gives it back to her. He said, but be careful, your pen is leaking. And then Yogi, who was known for saying very funny things, but people say that he didn't say those things. But this is what he did say. He gives her back the pen, their ink-stained hands. He has a white shirt, and he wipes it on his shirt like this, and then he says to the lady, you know, this shirt used to be white.
Wow, you got him. There was another incident, another observation of yours when someone asked him to sign an autograph with his full legal name.
Yeah. It was Steve Jacobson of Newsday, and again, it was at Cooperstown. And Steve had a baseball, and he asked Yogi if he would sign the autograph, the baseball, and Yogi said sure. And Steve said, "But could you sign it your full name, Lawrence Peter Berra?" Actually, he was born with an Italian name, Lorenzo Pietro Berra, but in America he was Lawrence Peter Berra. And so Steve asked him to sign it, Lawrence Peter Berra. And then Yogi had the ball, again he had a pen. And he said, "I haven't signed Lawrence Peter Berra in such a long time, I've forgotten how to spell it." And so this is Yogi being Yogi.
Well, yeah, and Yogi, he was like a jack in the box, at least in this column. I mean, he in '73 when he was the Mets manager, everybody wanted him fired, and all of a sudden at the end of the year they make that great run and they make the pennant.
Yeah.
And other examples of him kind of avoiding,
Well, look, even Casey Stengel was the manager of the Yankees and with 10 pennants and 7 World Series or something, and Yogi was his catcher for most of that time, and he relied on Yogi's brains. So I mean, you could joke about Yogiisms, but he was apparently a brilliant baseball man and a brilliant catcher.
Yeah.
And Casey Stengel, who was brilliant in his own way, appreciated this.
Yeah. Casey, it was hard to understand. I mean, I wonder what it was like to try to cover Casey when he would talk in those endless sentences that seemed to go, like a maze, like a rat, and
Yeah.
to try to follow what he was talking about.
Yeah. You wrote the way he talked, but you could make sense out of it somehow or other. You could make sense out of the Stengelese, it was called.
Well, yeah, he was drawing attention to himself because he was kind of the main attraction for a really bad team.
Yeah, but he was also a main attraction for one of the main attractions for good teams for the Yankees.
Oh, sure.
But
pretty good outfielder.
And he was a good outfielder.
Yeah. Let's talk about. We got to talk about Satchel Paige. You have him in a column in '69 at spring training, and he's sitting in his rocking chair,
Yeah.
which is what he known for, that rocking chair that he would just relax in and offer his philosophy on things about.
Yeah, he talked about that he thought that he should be. He was the greatest pitcher, maybe in his time, better than any major league. But he pitched in the Negro leagues. There were no blacks in his important years, until of course Jackie Robinson came in 1947, and I think that Satchel Paige felt that he should have been the first black in the major leagues. But then he said that he couldn't hold his tongue the way Jackie did in Jackie's first couple of years.
Yeah, he told you, what do you say? I couldn't have taken it the way Jackie did.
Yeah.
And and on that point about him thinking, that he was such an exceptional pitcher, which he was, and we never got to, most of America never got to see that because it was in the Negro Leagues. But he pointed out to you, and I'm sure you knew this anyway, that there was barnstorming in those days, and batters like Musial and Ted Williams and DiMaggio would barnstorm, and he faced them all.
He faced them all, and he said to me, and I kept them all in the park. So in other words, nobody hit a home run off him. He kept them in the park. But he said one of my best pitches was the bow tie pitch.
Yeah.
I said, "What's the bow tie pitch?" He said, "The bow tie pitch is you throw it right under a batter's chin, and you move them back from the plate." He said.
Yeah.
But that was his bow tie pitch.
Yeah, and he called it that, and he tried to teach it to other people.
Right,
Or
right.
other people were trying to learn from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't look back. Something may be gaining on you.
Yeah.
Satchel Paige.
And he was I think he was 42 when he first came up to the major leagues in 1948 with the Cleveland Indians, and at that age, I think he was 6-1.
And well, also a stat that you quote, and when this is not about stats, but with Satchel Paige, you point out that at age 59,
Yeah.
he pitched for the A's, and he pitched 3 innings.
Right. Gave up 1 run.
Yeah, 1 hit, I think.
1 hit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and they had brought him in just to, I guess, show him off one more time, so he
Yeah.
could pitch in so many different
To advertise,
decades.
Satchel Paige is going to pitch a couple of innings, so come to the ballpark.
Yeah.
You know.
Pitches 3 innings at age 59, allows 1 hit. Maybe he was the best that
Yeah.
we never saw. Do we have time for the? We have about 3 minutes. Can you tell the Ferguson Jenkins story in that time?
Ferguson Jenkins had a farm after he retired from baseball as the Hall of Fame pitcher for the Cubs and the Texas Rangers, and he had a farm in Oklahoma, large farm, and he had and he was living with a girlfriend. His wife had been killed in a car accident, and the girlfriend wanted to get married, and he didn't want to get married. And one day he gets a phone call from the police and said, "There's been a tragedy. What happened?" And the girlfriend had picked up Fergie's young daughter, 3 or 4 years old, from the nursery, and she picked her up and drove to a side road, and then put the what do you call it,
The hose from
the hose.
I think from a vacuum cleaner
Yeah.
that she had taken from the house.
Yeah, and she asphyxiated the little girl and herself. So
Murder-
it was
murder,
it was a
suicide.
murder and a suicide, and I thought this was a dramatic story to tell, and to write about, and to get Fergie's views on all this, and so I called him, and he wasn't amenable to this, but I said to him that it's important for people to know what people are thinking, and to be aware, for example, of the woman who was living with you, what she might be going through, and he said, "Come on out." And so I went out and I spent a couple of days with him, and also with the son of the woman that was killed.
His girlfriend.
The girlfriend.
Yeah. It's a tragic, obviously tragic, very moving column called "Another Tragic Twist in the Road." Maybe let's cap it with the slugging Professor Ted Williams, who at spring training, you saw him at Red Sox spring training one time, and wrote this line in the not leading the column, but in the column, about Ted instructing hitting. Ted Williams on hitting is Lindbergh on flying, Picasso on painting, and Little Richard on Tutti Frutti. Yes, he was, wasn't he?
Was he ever? Yeah, no, he was great. And the first time I ever saw him as a writer, I was down at Pompano Beach, where the Washington Senators, he was the manager of the Washington Senators at the time, and he was after a game, I was doing a series on Is Baseball Doomed? This was after 1968 with Yastrzemski leading the American League with 301 and Bob Gibson, and so I was just asking various people if baseball is doomed. It seemed like it was
Yeah, that was the
dying
year of the
sport.
pitcher. That's the year that after which they lowered the mound.
They lowered the mound, and
Yeah.
I went into the locker room afterward and to see Williams, and I posed a question to him, and a little old equipment man was putting away towels, and he turns to me and he says, "You can't ask Mr. Williams a question like that. How can you come in here and ask him about his baseball doom, you know?" And then Williams is sitting behind a desk, and I look at him, he looks at me, and he says quietly, he said, "I'm going to go in and take a shower. When I come out, I'll answer your questions."
Okay,
And-
we're going to leave it there because the answer is in the book, and so much more is in the book. Baseball's Best Ever by Ira Burko, a half century of covering Hall of Famers. It is a delight. We can do this. Can we just do the rest of the season all the way to June together? Would you be willing to sit here for
Oh,
another 3 days?
Of course, but you have to feed me.
Okay. Thank you, Ira.
Well, thank you, Tony. Great questions. It was a delight for me.
Delight for me too, and I hope for you. Thanks for watching.